Yeah. Funny thing happened yesterday. Venerable Seppel said, "Hey, you're doing the BBC tomorrow." And I kind of thought it had got postponed by one day because Venerable had done one, but that wasn't the case. So today, lately, I've been thinking about the wildfires, and we've been thinking about being prepared for a wildfire. It's been on the mind of a lot of people around here. There was a warning sent out that we might have thunderstorms that would possibly be dry lightning and real ideal conditions for getting a fire started. And this time of year, it's very dry. We always we have the possibility we could have to evacuate. And so if that situation comes up, we have a plan. We've been working on this plan and going over it a little bit so that we're familiar with the plan if a fire comes near. We don't want to be ordering we have spray we spray on the buildings called barricade. We don't want to be going, oh, here comes a fire, we better order some of that. So and now it got me thinking about preparedness in our Dharma practice, and there's some similarities with our Dharma practice. Just as we wouldn't want to start trying to come up with a plan while the fire is in sight, we don't want to wait until the afflictions arise to try and decide what we're going to do about them. And we don't want to wait till a time of death to start trying to work with our minds, because then we'll just end up dying with an afflicted mind. So we must be prepared beforehand. And when an affliction arises, unless we familiarize ourselves with the antidotes, then we're not going to have the presence of mind to counteract that, and we're going to be overwhelmed by the power of the afflictions. So what are the antidotes to different afflictions? Well, there's a lot of different afflictions, and some of them have specific antidotes. But in general, one antidote that's good for all of them is to think about the disadvantage of the affliction. That's each one, that is part of what we want to do with it. Think about the disadvantages of that. And although there's a lot of afflictions, it's good to start by thinking about the three poisons of anger, attachment, and ignorance. It's a good starting point. So when we look at anger, many of us can see that anger is not a happy state of mind. It's and it has negative consequences in our lives. When we let our minds be overcome with anger, we say and do things that can be harmful to others, and things that are not conducive to harmonious interactions and relationships, and things that we might regret saying or doing later. So anger and hatred are miserable, and actions created under their influence are also creating more misery. And if we get in the habit of watching our mind, we can see this. When we get angry, we can see that, oh, that is not a happy state of mind. And we can develop a desire to counteract it. Because without that desire to counteract the affliction, we won't have any resistance to the affliction when it arises. And I used anger as an example here because I think most people can recognize anger as a negative mental state, and if they reflect on it a bit. Attachment, however, is a different story. I think a big part of people not being so averse to attachment or not seeing the disadvantages of attachment have to do with not understanding what is meant when we say attachment. Sometimes attachment is stated as desire, but this is not quite it. You can have desire for enlightenment. You can have desire that I can have the desire that all beings become enlightened so that they can be free of suffering. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about just desire. Here we're talking about seeing something that is seeing something in an exaggerated and false way, and clinging to that as a source of happiness. So in his commentary on the Lamrim, Geshe Sopa says, when your sense faculties engage their respective objects, a sense consciousness arises, followed by a mental consciousness. This mental consciousness labels the object and imputes a quality, attractive or unattractive, pleasant or unpleasant, to it. This imputation of good or bad is mistaken. It is an incorrect perception because what is appearing is not a quality of the object at all. But because of that imputed quality, attachment arises for attractive objects, while anger and aversion arise for unattractive objects. If you are not aware of what is going on, then once a sense consciousness engages its object, it seems that desire or anger arise uncontrollably. When these mental afflictions, the inner enemies, suddenly jump out, there is no antidote. You have no way to restrain your mind. So attachment is not just a desire for something, but an unrealistic desire for something that doesn't exist in the way that we are perceiving it. It is a sort of obsession with a non-existent. The qualities that we are seeing are not existent. My point here is that in order to work with and oppose the mental afflictions, we need to know what we are opposing and be familiar with how the mind works. We need to be familiar with what we say it mean when we're talking about attachment or aversion. Just as we need to have some understanding of fire to be prepared for a wildfire coming. And we have to familiarize ourselves with our individual tendencies. Which afflictions arise for me most often? Which are the strongest? What antidotes are effective for me? So we need to use introspective awareness to be familiar with our minds. We need to study the afflictions and practice with them, meditate on them, in order that we know what works for us and that we are ready when the afflictions arise. And I'm not going to go into the details of all the afflictions and their antidotes. Here what I'm trying to convey is the necessity of learning about these topics and reflecting and meditating on them in order to be capable of putting them into practice when afflictions arise. So we do a lot of work in the forest here. We've been doing a lot of fuels reduction in the forest for years and making the forest less likely to become an inferno if we do have a fire. And similarly, we can do work with our minds that help us to weaken the habitual tendencies we have towards indulging in the afflictions. The meditations that are intended to produce virtuous states of mind can be quite effective at changing how we habitually perceive situations and how we interact with others. So when I'm angry with someone, if all I know how to do to counteract the anger is to repress it, then it's just going to smolder. But having worked with seeing the kindness of others, practicing seeing good qualities of others, seeing that others like myself are suffering under the power of afflictions, this helps me have the ability to turn my mind away from anger and to extinguish it, to have developed a lot of the tendencies of caring about others and compassion and kindness. Then I have somewhere to turn my mind to when it's going in the wrong direction. This is kind of like being able to extinguish a small ground fire in the forest when the fuels have been addressed already. So we've tried to prepare the forest here for the possibility of a fire. With the afflictions, unless you've attained some true cessations and strong realizations, don't kid yourself, the seeds of the afflictions are there, and given the causes and conditions, they will arise. We are ordinary beings under the power of the afflictions and the karma that we've created under their influence. So when the afflictions arise, don't beat yourself up and think you're bad. Have the antidotes ready and apply them, and rejoice that you have the opportunity to practice what you've learned through the Dharma teachings and meditations. And the last part, I think, is it's actually one of the antidotes to, say, anger, is to say, oh, if I'm angry at a certain person, this person is giving me the opportunity to practice these antidotes that I've been studying, so that they're not just something I have on my computer screen or in a book, but something I can actually practice, you know. And the same with attachment. You can see how good are those antidotes unless we put them into practice. So it's about being prepared ahead of time.